Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm going to be taking you through what is my favourite build of the year. It's not necessarily the build that has produced the most performance, but it is the build that has produced the most joy for me, and that is because I think it's really difficult to know what is a good setup. It's very easy to make a video where you build a copter and then just fly it, but I think what is important to a lot of people is what is a good setup, because you might have video noise, you might have flips of death, etc. I think the way that you build a copter these days is pretty standard, but to have the right components is very important, and this one just came together. So this is the Flex RC 3-inch Ascent, and you can order it off the Flex RC website. And the great thing about this is it's a 3-inch model that is capable of carrying a run cam split, at the same time being very lightweight. So it comes in at under 200 grams, which is just fantastic. And we've got some great components here as well. So you can see we've got the run cam split that comes in at the bottom here. And one thing that's very important about this setup is that there is next to no noise that comes through to the split. And this is something that I have struggled with when building copters around the split. It's very susceptible to noise. So you can see I've got the split down here on the 30 by 30 stack, and then we have got this adapter up here that lets us take a 20 by 20 stack. This is the HGL-RC stack, so 28 amp ESCs, fantastic flight controller, and then VTX on the top, and then we've got a XM Plus receiver on there as well. It's built for a 4S battery. The only weak point that I found was the motors, and that is not because of the performance, it's because of the quality. These cables here on the motors, they are not silicone, so when you're soldering them up, they burn very easily. And one thing I noticed as well, you can see here, I wasn't able to get one of the screws into the motor. So these screws are not very long. They do fit into the motor, but I actually managed to break the thread on one of them. If I had a longer screw, that would be fine. It's just like the initial thread. So I wasn't too impressed with the quality of the motors, but I was impressed with the performance of the motor. So they're the T-Motor F20, 3200 kV. The propellers I've changed out, they are the GEP RC propeller, and they are a 3042. So yeah, really nice propeller. I like these. They aren't the stock propellers that it came with. But yeah, I'm going to be running this on a 4-cell battery today. You can go 650 milliamp 4S, you can go 850 milliamp. I find 850 milliamp gives you the best flight time. One thing that is great about this build is you can access the SD card here to take it out. This is the V1 of the micro split, so at the date of this video, it is at a discount, but there's only a few left, and then that will go to the V2, so that will make it a more expensive copter. But I will say, it's a build really worth investing in, because, yeah, it has been absolutely fantastic. You will need a couple of extra things, though, I found. You'll need one of these standoff boxes here, because the standoffs that you're given with the split V1 and the HGL-RC stack, they're not quite long enough. So yeah, pick yourself up one of these. I'll link to it in the below, because we've got different spaces and things like that that I used, but pretty much everything that you see here you got in the package. I did have to use my own battery strap. Sometimes Flex RC you get a battery strap, sometimes not. I'm not sure what that's about, but it's something to consider, because I had to add one here. And of course, you're going to need a transmitter. I'm going to be using my FrSky Taranis Plus here. And for FPV, it's the Fat Shark Dominator HD3s with the Furious FPV True Diversity module, a Menace Invader patch antenna. Actually, it's the Bandicoot that I'm going to be using with this, because this is a linear antenna, and then we've got the aomway cloverleaf antenna on there as well. So yeah, it's not a cheap setup, but it's a fantastic setup, and I think that is very important. So let's get on to the build. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is take your battery strap and feed that through the frame, because the stack is going to get built above that, so it might be difficult to feed that through once everything is done. Next, I'm taking one of the longest screws out of the standoff kit and one of the little ring spacers and putting that over there, and then a single nut. And you need to do that for all 4 of the standoffs to give the split V1 enough space underneath there. So that is the V1 board going over the top there, and then I'm taking 2 nuts as spacers. So this is up to you, but I found this worked nicely, and you can screw them down at the same time to save a bit of time, and you need to do that for all 4 of them, of course. And then I'm taking the XT30 and tinning up the positive and negative. I didn't get an XT30 in this package, so I had to source it myself. And I didn't get any wires either, so that's the positive and the negative getting soldered in there. I had to source those myself. And also some heat shrink as well, and a candle lighter to secure that up to make sure there's no shorts. I'm then going to tin up the positive and negative for the ESC board. And then I'm going to cut the battery cables to length, just using some wire cutters, and then stripping those as well, ready for tinning up. So I'm going to take a pair of pliers with a rubber band around them as a helping hand, and then I'm just going to tin up the positive and negative there. I find it really easy, especially for filming. And then I'm soldering in the positive there to the ESC board, and then the negative at an angle that's going to come round underneath. And then I'm tinning up all of the ESC solder pads, and I'll just speed that up so you don't have to watch it in slow motion. Plenty of heat in the iron. I'm using 400 degrees here, and be as quick as you can. It's a Hakko iron. So this is the converter board for the 20x20 stack. So I'm taking the 2M screws you're given there, and then more of these little ring spacers there to miss the components. And then that's going to feed through underneath there. It's also going to miss the SD card as well on the split V1. These are the nylon 2M standoffs that you're given in the kit, and those are just going to fit over the top there, and you can see it gives enough space to solder up the ESCs there. So yeah, plenty of space. Now I'm screwing in the motors, and as I mentioned, I wasn't too impressed with the motors. The screws were just long enough to screw in, but on one of them I managed to break the thread just at the start, and one of these screws wouldn't go in, so it's probably best to use thread lock, or maybe even source some longer screws there, but 3 screws should be fine there. So I'm just screwing all of those in there, and you can see that is done. Then I'm fitting the converter board over the top. You can see there in the position so that it doesn't catch up to the SD card slot. And then I'm cutting the wires to length, and again I mentioned these wires I weren't too impressed with because they aren't silicone. They're fine for cutting but not great for soldering. If you make sure that each wire goes direct to the motor pad, then you don't have to make any changes in BLHS. Then I'm using my Eclipse wire splitting tool here. It's an expensive tool, about £18, but it speeds up the build so much just to strip all of these wires here. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to need to tin those up. I think the build is about 3 or 4 hours, but you have to take into account that I'm filming at the same time, so it does take longer. So now I'm tinning up all of those motor wires, and I'll just speed that up so you don't have to watch it in slow motion. And I'm soldering all of the motor wires up straight here. And it was tricky because those wires kept melting and I had to keep cutting them. So maybe give yourself a little bit more length than you normally would with some silicone wires, because yeah, the coating melts when you solder them up, and it's a little bit tricky, but not too bad because these motors didn't produce any noise with this combination, so I can't really complain. But yeah, not great for the build. So next, I am tinning up all of the solder pads for the flight controller. So this is going to be for the camera going in, it's going to be for my receiver going in, and also the VTX as well. Sadly, the VTX does not use standoff pins. You have to solder that separately, so you'll see that being done here. But for now, just tinning up everything that needs to be done. I'm also going to install a buzzer as well, which does not come in the kit, so I sourced the buzzer separately there and made it up myself. I'd recommend doing that for sure with a little microcopter. So now I'm just tinning up the S-bus, the 5V in the ground here on the XM Plus. Then I'm taking some excess wire that I've got here, and that's going to need to be stripped each side, and it's also going to need to be tinned each side as well. So yeah, a lot of work goes into these models. If you are used to buying RTFs, yeah, I don't know how they do it sometimes for the amount of time that this takes to build compared to the cost. But yeah, just tinning up all of these wires each side so that I can solder it to the receiver and also the flight controller. So in goes the signal wire on the XM Plus, and then this is the 5V there, and then also the negative. And then this is the positive going into the flight controller, and the negative, and also the signal. Then I'm using a candle lighter to shrink up the heat shrink there. And then this is the buzzer that I have made up, so that's the negative going in, and the positive, I've put it on a wire. This is the RunCam split wire, so essentially what would be a camera on a normal copter. So I've fed that through to the front, and then I'm tightening up the standoffs there with some nuts. Then I've cut that to length, and then I'm going to strip these, so we're left with a positive, a negative, and a signal for the split. So just tinning those up there, and then in goes the 5V. So it's using the Beck on the flight controller. It's a 3A Beck. It works perfect, and no brownout issues. Yeah, and the negative going in there as well. So I've got some excess wire left over from the RunCam splits wire. I'm going to strip each side of that, and this is going to be for soldering in the VTX. So yeah, just tinning all those up each side. Sadly, the VTX does not slot onto some pins. You do have to connect it up separately. It's one downside. So that's actually VBAT that's going to go through to there rather than regulated. That's the signal. And then this is the ground there. And then I'm going to tin up the same on the VTX there. And then I'm just going to solder those in. So quite tricky. That is the negative, that is the VBAT, and then that is the signal going in there. Now that flips over the top, and you can use the standoffs, the 2mm standoffs over the top there, so you can see that just fits over nicely. And then you get given some little tiny nuts, 2M nuts over there. You can't cut those screws very easily because they are metal. This is the UFL connector going in there, and then this is some silicone padding for the battery. That's my silicone padding, you're not given that. Some double-sided sticky foam for the receiver to stick on. Again, you're not given that, that is mine. And then these are the sides that are going in for the camera to connect to, and it also protects as well. Those just tension fit in, really like this design. And then this is just some 1.5mm hex screws that you're given, and they split to screw in. And for the flight, I push the camera further forward to get the props out of shot. These are two standoffs that go into the back and the top, and you get given a third to go underneath, which I didn't include, so I could run my camera at a better angle and further forward, but just keeps everything in check there. And I think those are 1.5mm hex screws as well. And then I'm using a cable tie on the sleeve dipole antenna at the back there, and then cutting that off. It's my cable tie I had to get. Then a cable tie in for the buzzer at the back as well, and now two cable ties in for the receiver's antennas to go over the top. Again, my cable ties, my heat shrink. So gonna take some 3mm heat shrink and cut those to length and put them over the top of the antennas, and just use a candle lighter to shrink those into place, and we are pretty much done. Pretty nice, neat build, I think you'll agree. Okay, so to set up a model, it's really easy. I'm going to be using my Tyrannus here, so if I go into the menu, I've called the model the Ascent 3. Then if we scroll down, I've got the failsafe set to no pulses. And then if we go up here, I've got it set to D16 for the XM Plus receiver, and the channel range 1 to 8, so that we get the best latency out of this setup. Then you are going to want to go and press the bind button, and this is where you're going to want to plug a battery into the copter whilst pressing down on the bind button of the receiver, and then exit out of that, and then you will be bound to it. And then if I just scroll over here now to the mixer tab, so this Tyrannus is set up as TAER, so throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, but some of them are set up as AETR out of the box, so you'll have to check that in the mapping in Betaflight. But I've got 3 AUXs set up, channel 5 if we go into there and press edit. So I've got that one, it's called M, that is for modes, and you can select the switch that you want, so it's this switch up here and it will change it, and that's all that you need. And then into channel 6, I've called that A for arm, and that's going to be on this 2-position switch. Again, you can just select the switch that you want. And then channel 7 I've called B, and that is just for a buzzer, and I've got on this switch here. And that is pretty much everything that I set up. I use the on-screen display for my telemetry, so I don't mess around with that. You can't do that with the XM Plus anyway, which I'm absolutely fine with. Okay, so here we are in the Betaflight configurator. You now have to download this as a standalone app because unfortunately they have discontinued Chrome apps, but it's fine because we can just download it separately. So you can see it says COM16 at the top there. I've got the quadcopter plugged into the computer via a USB lead, so I'm going to press connect. So I've got expert mode enabled here just so we can see some other options. So the first thing you're going to want to do is calibrate the accelerometer of the copter, so make sure it's on a level surface when you do that. I've already done that. So if we go into the ports here, and you need to turn on the serial RX for the UART one if you are using this setup with an S-Bus receiver, and then save and reboot any changes you make there. So I've got D-Shot 600 enabled under the configuration tab. I've got motor stop turned off. I've got the motor idle throttle value at 8%. So this combination with this ESC stack and the motors, they idle very low, so in order to stop it from flipping over, because when the throttle is very low and you've got a high rate, sometimes it has to stop the motor to match the rate that you have chosen in order for it to do that roll rate that you've asked for, or I don't know, the flip rate, whatever. So I found 8% works fine here, and we don't get any what is known as flips of death. You can play around with that. I found there's plenty of hang time with that figure, but if you find it a little bit too floaty, you might want to mess around with that. So no more changes down here, and I've got the gyro and PID loop frequency at 8K, 2K. You can mess around with that as well, but I'm just keeping it like that for now. I've changed the craft name to Ascent 3, that's just for the on-screen display. And then I've got serial-based receiver here for my receiver and S-Bus down here. And then if I scroll down a bit more, I've got ammo permanently on, I've got on-screen display on, anti-gravity permanently on, and dynamic filtering turned on as well, but I'm not going to take you through the notch filters in this. That was just my setup. And then if we scroll down a bit more, I've got USB turned off for the beeper as well. So into power and battery. I've got onboard ADC for the voltage meter, but there's no current meter, so I've got that turned off. I've got both warnings set at 2.9 because I just want to look at the on-screen display. I don't want the beeper going off when I throttle up. I find that annoying. I've also set the maximum cell voltage to 4.5 if I ever want to use a high volt on there as well. And there was no need to mess around with the scaling with this setup. So fail-safe these days, you don't really need to mess around with it, but it's set to drop there. Of course, you do need to check that fail-safe works, so make sure the props are off, plug your battery in, arm your copter, turn your transmitter off, and make sure that the motors stop before you do your maiden flight. So into the PID tuning, and I've just put some PIDs in here that I think will work well on a 4S. And then I've got my Super 8.8 and everything else in there is stock. Onto the receiver tab, and it's set up as TAER to match my Tyrannus. There's no RSSI output set up on this XM Plus, so I got that disabled there. Into the modes, and this just mirrors how I set the Tyrannus up. So we have got arming on the AUX2 on that 2-position switch, then I've got on the AUX1 angle and then acro, and of course when it's an acro it's also got air mode and anti-gravity. I don't bother with horizon these days, just those two, so angle for safety and acro for fun. And then I've got the beeper on the AUX3 down here as well. So no adjustments made, nothing on the servo, no need to calibrate the ESCs because it's D-shot. On the on-screen display, I've moved this around and I don't usually have it like this, but this is because I am using the full 16:9 screen of the split. So I got asked this question quite a lot because when you get the split, it's in a 4:3 aspect ratio, but it cuts off quite a lot of the picture if you do that. So I found that if you stop the recording, because when you plug the battery in, the split will automatically start recording. Stop the recording, and then if you press the buttons for, I think it's like 3 goes, you get into the menu, and you've got like TV output, and if you turn full screen off, then that gives you the full 16:9 aspect ratio. And I've chosen PAL here as well. I do believe if you choose NTSC, then the latency is a bit better, but with PAL I can get my on-screen display in the black part of the picture just nicely. So I've got the model name there, I've got the average cell voltage, the overall voltage, and the flight mode, and also the flight time. And I've turned some of the things off down here as well. So lastly, let's go into the CLI, and I'll show you the version. I did upgrade it to the latest version at the time, so this is an Omnibus F4 as the target, 3.22, and there is another command that I put in which you may have seen in my other videos. I wish they put this as an option in Betaflight. It is set small underscore angle equals 180 and then save. I like to put that in because it means that if your copter gets stuck in a tree, then you can arm it and sort of wiggle it out, so it'll let your copter arm no matter what angle it's at, whereas if you leave it, the copter has to be pretty much flat until it will arm. You'll get those 3 beeps on the buzzer before you can arm it, so that's something that I like to do as well. So I'm going to disconnect on this now and just take you into BL Halley Suite. Make sure you are disconnected from Betaflight and then plug your battery and make sure that you don't have any propellers on the copter. It's important. So COM16 at the top there, I'm going to press connect and then read setup. I didn't need to change anything in here, so it's just to show you here that everything is set normal on the direction here, so I didn't need to change anything. But if you soldered up a couple of the wires in different orders, then you can check which motor it is and then change it here and then write the setup. But everything here is just stock, and that is all of the setup. So once everything is set up, you are going to want to install the props. So I say this a lot in my videos, but the way I remember it is at the front, the curvature of the prop here should always turn inwards. So you've got curvature there going inwards, curvature there going inwards, and then you flip the copter around and it should be exactly the same. So curvature inwards there, and make sure that you use a spanner or a socket set to get these nuts on very tight as they will go, and they are locking so they won't come off there. All just the same direction here on the T motor, which is fine. And of course these are the GEP RC 3042 propellers. As for batteries, I think the best battery choice for this is a 850 milliamp 4S, and you can try a 650 milliamp 4S. The best brand to go for is probably Tattoo, although I've been using these very cheap XF power batteries. Been flying fine. I've been getting 4-minute flight times, loads of power, so I actually quite like these batteries. But if you want to go for better quality ones, well, that's up to you. Okay, let's go for the maiden with this. It's a little bit of a risk with the snow because there's no coating on this to make it waterproof, and you'll have to excuse my voice because I got a little bit of a cold, poor me. Well, everything seems fine so far, and man, this feels like it's got a bit of power. Let's try. Oh yeah. Plenty of power, not too noisy either. Oh, that is just awesome. With a run cam split on there as well. Should I go into acro in this lovely weather? Why not? Oh yeah, this is looking good. This is looking very good. Yep, nice and smooth. Just some random pits I've got on here. It's cold out here today. -5 apparently. Oh yes, what a beauty. Need to remember if I put an SD card in there. Doesn't really matter for the line of sight, I guess. I like this. I like it a lot. Well, it's past the line of sight test. Oh yeah, that's nice. Right. Let me flick it back into angle mode, and then I gotta land it on this tiny patch where there's no snow. Yes!
Just